let's go back to your earliest entry into Afghanistan. Talk about Operation Rhino and how did you find the country?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting time. On on the 12th of September, right after the horrific events of the day before, I was the commander of the Army's Ranger Regiment, and we knew almost immediately that what had happened would cause some kind of response. We weren't sure exactly where that was going to take place. Very early on there were discussions about Afghanistan, but relatively soon after that, we actually began to start doing some preliminary planning and looking at things we could do. And one of the things that struck me was how much we did not know about Afghanistan, about its people, about its tribal nature, about its history, about its infrastructure, about what we would potentially do. And I can remember we spent a considerable amount of time in the early time thinking about, okay, well, what can we do? What is there something we can go after? How can we strike back? How can we hold Al Qaeda and the Taliban at risk? And it was very difficult identifying, specific targets like we might have done in a campaign against Saddam Hussein that that he valued, that when taken away or destroyed, you know, uh, lessened his strength, his influence, his ability to wage war. That was very, very difficult to identify in Afghanistan. There weren't these great targets that we can go after. It wasn't much at all. So a big part of the first part of our response to this was coming to that realization that we didn't know much about this, and then of course we had to kind of design. So the country wanted to respond. The president wanted to respond in terms of this. We within a short order had recognized the role that the Taliban had played in enabling Al Qaeda to use Afghanistan as a platform to plan and influence and support these perpetrations that had taken place in our country. So we knew that this was where we were going to go, and then we began putting together concepts for this. And essentially, I think to make it simple, the way we looked at Afghanistan in two parts. We looked at the southern part of the country, and we looked at the northern part of the country. And there really were two different challenges there. In the northern part of the country, you had warlords that were operating up there, the people like Dostum that we talked about a little bit earlier. And so the approach that was taken up there from a U.S. standpoint was to use U.S. Special Operations Forces, really going in and capitalizing on some of their unique skills for irregular warfare and developing partner forces and enabling them, and very successfully executed a campaign down there. Our focus in the south was much more of what I would describe as a counterterrorism focus, and it was much more focused at where we anticipated Taliban operating organizations, where Al Qaeda might be, and so our operations took much more of a flavor of counterterrorism. That is, going in and hitting things, coming back out, going and hitting other things, coming back out. Much more of a raid approach, and that's kind of the way that it played out. So Rhino referred to this airfield that was located in the Registan Desert of Helmand province, actually, and it was actually it had a hunting compound, a rather elaborate hunting compound that was used for falconry
The
by
Arabs used to go there. I mean, I've
the
lived
Arabs. Used to
in
go there. My understanding is the Sultan of
and
Dubai had some financial interest in all of that, and it was a pretty well established. It was a dirt airfield, but you
yeah.
wouldn't know it was dirt if you walked on it. It was very, very well maintained, very compacted, and it had the ability to be a great platform for us to launch operations. So, the first night of operations, it was our job, the Rangers' job, to go in and seize that. And then there were some other organizations, some other special operations organizations that went in and did more kind of these raid type operations. One went after Mullah Umar's compound, and then There were some others doing some other things, and then a lot of those forces collapsed back into our airfield, and then we used that as a way for them to kind of get back out and get back to our staging bases. So that was the nature of the operation. We put just a couple of hundred Rangers on the ground that night. It was extraordinarily dark. There's not much ambient light there. We're at about 5,000 feet.
But the skies are majestic, look up
Beautiful.
at.
It was extraordinary. But you're at a relatively high elevation. We're jumping out of aircraft from just above 500 feet above ground level. So you're not spending much time in the air. It's very thin air as it is. So you're coming down pretty hard. I remember having a pretty hard landing there, as I think most Rangers did.
So you had a hard landing in Afghanistan.
It was really dark, and even with the use of night vision devices and goggles, which we all had, those are really designed to kind of build on ambient light that's out there. There isn't much. And so it was.
So how was the first encounter with it gets bright and day, and you got to, see how the country looks and how the people look?
Well, you know what? We in that first operation, we actually came in, did our mission, and then withdrew before daylight. So we weren't around that day. Then we left the only thing that remained behind were about 200 parachutes that were bagged and located at the various locations off the airfield there. So they didn't interfere with our aircraft that were coming in there and departing. But that was all that was left behind. So as we came in, there were several small engagements that we had on the periphery of the airfield, but for the most part, we were able to come in and seize it intact and get it secured, and then perform the other missions that airfield was designed to support and through the period of darkness. And then we extracted everybody out and went back to our staging base, and then over time, in the coming days and weeks, got into more of a rhythm of going back in and doing these raid type operations for several more weeks before we finally made the decision that we needed to more permanently go in and stay on the ground in Afghanistan. Again, a lot of this is driven by what we didn't know about the country. We didn't know how the Afghans or the Taliban or others were going to respond to our presence on the ground. I guess in looking back in it, I could say we might have been a little risk averse in terms of this. We were trying to make sure we were protecting our forces. We just didn't know. There was so much we didn't know about Afghanistan. And while we learned a lot, over the next 20 years, I would probably tell you that at the end of that, I think there were probably people who were saying the same thing. There was just so much we did not know about Afghanistan.
But how was the first encounter with the people? Like, General Votel lands in the country and meets the real people. And, how much was it of
I
kind
found
of your...
them to be, one of the things we studied we went back there and, subsequently were interacting with the population. And most of my focus was in the south and in the eastern part of the country. I was supporting some operations up in the north and out to the west a little bit, but the predominance was in the east and south. And one of the things we really paid attention to, I think was really important, was appreciating the Pashtun code.
Yeah.
How a really important cultural understanding of how the Pashtuns, welcome visitors and strangers that came through their area and stuff like that. So, in my encounters with the Afghan, I found them to be very hospitable, to be kind towards us. They were a little bit weary worry, I should say, of us. I mean, I can't tell you the dozens and dozens of times that I had discussions with Afghan civilians or Afghan military officers or, political leaders who, especially in the early days, wanted to know if we were there to stay. They remembered when we came during the Soviets, we helped. We helped, get the Soviets out, and then we left and we didn't stay. And they were very concerned about that. So while I think they were glad to glad to see us, they were also, I think, a little skeptical about what our long-term objectives might be. And I think that was kind of that was something that I think we encountered in the beginning. But they are extraordinarily generous people. They don't have much, but they give you everything that they have. As somebody who's been the recipient of more Afghan meals than I can count.
What is your favorite?
Well, they all kind of seem the same to me. There's a lot of rice, it's a lot of lamb, it's Afghan bread and a lot of fruit and stuff like that. Really, really good, and different meats and other things. They're just very, very generous people. That I think is part of their code. They
Yeah.
take care of their visitors. They want them to feel welcome, and they are overly generous in providing whatever they have to them. So I developed a real appreciation for the Afghan people, and it only grew as time went on. And I think they began to, I think, develop an appreciation for us. One of the one of the things that we did, I went back a number of times, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was, I started there as a colonel, and my last time I was there was as a four-star general. But did went back a lot of times. I actually had an opportunity to interact for a period with a number of members of the parliament. We would oftentimes bring them up to Bagram
Yeah.
and take time to show them the operations we were doing. There were obviously real concerns about some of the special operations raids that we were doing. That were going into their homes, and sometimes the collateral damage and civilian casualties are caused. So we tried to take those things very seriously, and we invited people up. We wanted to talk to them about this, and so and oftentimes we brought
Yeah,
members
yeah,
of
yeah.
male and female up there, and these were extraordinary engagements. I recall one in particular. This was probably in the 2010 or 11, maybe 11 or 11 time frame. We had one of our former soldiers come back, a soldier who had been a recipient of the Medal of Honor, our highest military
Yeah, yeah.
decoration. He had been a member of our organization and now was back kind of visiting the organization. And he happened to be there on the evening that we brought a number of these parliamentarians up. And we were all down in this little meeting area where we briefed them and talked with them. And I explained who this soldier was, this Medal of Honor recipient, and it was extraordinary for me. There was a female member of Parliament who was listening very carefully to the story that I was telling about this, and she began to weep and cry. And then, all of them really just expressed this very heartfelt thanks to not only to this member, but to, all the military members that were in there that had come to Afghanistan to beat the Taliban and get rid of Al Qaeda and provide an opportunity for young boys and girls in their own country to grow up. So I mean, I have a very warm affection for the Afghan people that was developed, or I still do. And they deserve better than they got.
When you saw that deal being signed by Khalilzad and the Mullah brother, did you, looking from far away, did you see it as an opportunity or a betrayal?
Well, I was out of uniform at the time, so I wasn't close to the discussions that were actually taking place and what all that might mean in very great specifics. I mean, it had taken some time to get to some kind of agreement with the Taliban, and so that was an achievement of some sorts. I was unsure of how much interaction that we had with the Afghan government about that, and it appears that we did not had enough with all of that. And so there was also a part of me that when that was taking place, I did have some concern about how this is all gonna play out here in the coming months as we actually moved much more tangentially towards pulling our forces out of Afghanistan. So a little bit of trepidation,
Hmm.
I agree, the opportunity for an agreement, but certainly some trepidation in how all that was going to be implemented.
And those, really painful days of August, you lost soldiers in Afghanistan, you lost allies in Afghanistan. How were those days for you? And I mean, in Britain, I was kind of involved in doing political work, and those were incredibly painful days for the families of the soldiers who'd fought in Afghanistan, the soldiers who'd been maimed in the country. But that's from the Western point of view. But how did it feel for you, having had a lot of work done, a lot of responsibilities, leading forces in Afghanistan? How did that feel?
Well, I mean, I was sitting here in Minnesota. I'm watching it play out like most Americans and most people around the world were. I mean, there certainly is an element of disappointment to it that it turned out the way that it did. I'm certainly old enough to remember when in 1975 during the evacuation of Saigon and what that looked like and what the impact that had on the psyche of Americans and others and how frantic all of that looked. And of course, that's what we were seeing in this case. So it was heartbreaking to see all of that. And of course, exacerbated by the loss of soldiers and Marines who were in there trying to help evacuate people and help evacuate the remainder of our forces and diplomats and others that were on the ground. So I think it was very, very difficult to watch all of that. I certainly have lost colleagues and people that were very, very close to me in the fighting with that. And I will tell you, one of the things that that kind of well, one of the things that bothered me as I heard about this is that there was a lot of discussion in our country, in the media and in the information spaces about what a waste. We have wasted all of these lives, wasted all of this effort here, and really all these soldiers that had been killed or wounded or maimed. This was a complete waste, and I've rejected that, and I did it in a public way, and I've spoken about it a number of different times, and when I speak with family members of people who served in Afghanistan and who lost people, I try to remember this, and what I try to highlight is that you can't judge sacrifice by the way things turned out. You can only judge sacrifice in the context in which it is rendered. And those who fought and died or were wounded, they were doing that for what they believed to be a noble cause. I believe that it was a noble cause. Our efforts were noble, even if our strategy was a little inconsistent over the time. I never questioned my commitment to the things that we were doing, and I don't think many that I served with judge questioned their commitment to it. I certainly do appreciate some in retrospect may do that, but that was not my case, nor many of that I served with, and so it bothered me that people had tried to conclude that this was a waste, and it wasn't. And I would never want an American family or anybody that I serve with to think that we did not appreciate the sacrifices that were made, and that those sacrifices were not made with in the spirit of teamwork, of the spirit of trying to perform an important mission for an organization, of doing what people thought was right at the time, and so that aspect bothered me a lot, and something I do think about, and I do talk about quite a bit. I also will tell you I'm bothered by the challenges that we have had of trying to help our Afghan partners get out of Afghanistan. I think this has been harder than it needed to be. And I mean, I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I'm not I live now not far from where I grew up, just a few miles. And in 1975, we talked about the fall of Saigon, and we talked about the end of the Vietnam War. Many of the boat people came to Minnesota. We have a huge population of Hmongs here in
Mhm.
Minnesota, and they came by the thousands, and they came in the dead of winter. But the community here embraced them, brought them in, wrapped their arms around them, as they've done in other communities across our country, and now they're very contributing members, very well integrated here, very contributing members to
They
our.
are Americans, as
They're
Americans.
Americans. Absolutely, they're Americans, and they were embraced, and they're contributing citizens in so many ways that have enriched our community here. And that was the example that I saw, that I hope that we could provide for the Afghans, for some of the Afghans that come. I
Mhm.
recognize we can't take the whole population, but certainly for those that were with us. I think we made the process very, very difficult. We put people in holding camps. We made it very bureaucratic in terms of trying to get through this. Members of Congress intervened and expressed strong concerns about the vetting, even a vetting of people that we had worked with who had already been through vetting. It's deeply frustrating to see what we had done in terms of this. And I think we, as if our overall strategy wasn't as much as wasn't an insult, or certainly the follow through there, I think was a definite insult to many who had served well with us. And it's never too late, I think, to try to do the right thing. I hope we can figure this out at some particular point, but I don't think we don't think we served those who fought alongside us as well as we could have.
General, Saigon or Kabul, which has been more consequential for America? And did Kabul play a part in Vladimir Putin's calculations that this is the time to go after the West?
I have no idea how Mr. Putin is calculating anything here. I don't. I mean, perhaps it was an influence. I don't know how. I don't know how decisive it was. I don't think that it was, in my own personal view. I really can't answer that. I think that's one that he has to answer himself. But um, in terms of Saigon or Kabul, which one is more uh, influential? I mean, I think certainly both of them were, in their own ways and in their own times, influenced things. I mean, the setbacks in Vietnam, are what led to really kind of a reformation in our military and in our government here, of rebuilding our military in a way that I think represented the American people very well, and I think performed and continues to perform very well. Whether Kabul will do the same thing, I don't know. It certainly has had an impact, I think, and on the political spectrum. I'm not a politician. I have never run for office.
But
That's not
would
my.
you? I mean, have you? Americans have a tradition of generals going into politics and even becoming
Yeah,
president.
it's not something that deeply interests me at this point in my life. So I don't think there'll be any future for me in elected politics. But yeah, it certainly has. It certainly was a feature of our most recent presidential election, and people, highlighting what went wrong during all of that. It certainly didn't provide great images for anybody to associate themselves with. So yeah, I think that definitely has an impact. I think what will be important is what we learn out of all of this, and what commitments we make to make sure we don't repeat this again in the future.
General, I'm not. I'm really conscious of time. I'm really grateful, really, really grateful for you for this opportunity. Now, has anything the Taliban have done that surprised you, or not? You expected them to be as vicious towards women as they are.
I uh I'm not overly surprised. I was initially thinking that as the Taliban came back in, they too would learn from their previous experience and and recognize, where some progress had been made that they could build upon for a better Afghanistan. And I'm talking specific about women's education and as an example of that. I mean, these are things that I think could have been embraced by them and not necessarily been a direct threat to their rule in Afghanistan. But I think what we've seen over time is they have returned to the same Taliban that we knew that they were. And that any enlightenment which might have taken place over their time out of power was only temporary and certainly not sustained. So I think the Taliban is the Taliban, and they're back in power, but I don't think they've changed, and that's not a huge surprise, even despite the fact that I'd hoped that they might.
The US have been, in a sense, behind the scenes on security sense, partnering with the Taliban against ISIS in, pockets. But can they really be partners for the US against Islamist terrorists? While do you see a clear dividing line between the Taliban and other Islamists?
I don't know. The United States has an ability to overcome some of this. I mean, look at our relationship with Vietnam today. We managed to normalize relations with them. It didn't occur immediately, but it did occur, and they are one of the nations that we court and try to influence and try to maintain a good relationship with out in the Indo-Pacific, because we see them aligned with some of the same objectives that we have out there. So, yeah, well, I think we can move forward with former adversaries. Whether the Taliban is there or not, I don't know. I'm not sure I can offer much of an educated view of where Talibanism falls in the variety of isms that course across that region there. I know right now it does not appear to be uh, particularly good for the people of Afghanistan. I don't know that they are being taken care of any better now than they were in the past under Taliban rule. And hopefully that will improve over time. Um, I guess we'll see. I mean, I think it's just another feature of this very, very complicated region.
Ellie, you mentioned you didn't know Afghanistan. America didn't know Afghanistan, how little you knew Afghanistan, but how much better General Votel knows Afghanistan.
Well, we certainly know a lot more about what works and what doesn't work in Afghanistan, and we about the I think we learned a lot about our own assumptions that we made going into this, that people aspire to the same values and approaches and processes that we do. That's certainly not the case. I think we learned a lot of humility out of this, obviously. So yeah, I mean, I think we've learned a lot, but again, and these are complex societies, and we started to develop people who had clear knowledge in this, and we had things like the Afghan Hands program and other things that were designed to develop people within our government, our military, within our diplomatic and other parts of our government who had long-term expertise in Afghanistan and this part of the world. I think that's important for us to do. During the height of the Cold War, we developed people that really had innate understanding of the Soviets and of Sovietology and everything else, and could understand all that, and that served us very, very well. We were having to do the same thing with China right now. I think it's important for us to invest in our people, invest in our agencies, our military, our intelligence community, and other parts of our government, to make sure that we have people who have the requisite expertise and knowledge of these different regions where our interests are located. And I think it serves us well. And I'm oftentimes concerned about our kind of our short attention to some of these things. We have to be willing to invest in these for the long term, and I hope that that's something that we will do.
General, let's end this with a bit of an anecdote, as you usually do. When you reminisce about Afghanistan, what's your favorite drink?
Oh, I'm a beer drinker.
Okay, so when you have your beer reminiscing about Afghanistan, what story, what anecdote stands out for you that you share with your friends and that laugh out loud moment about the country?
Uh, wow. Um, well, that's an excellent question. I'll tell you what stands out with me is in on New Year's Eve, 2007, 2008. I went down and I was invited by Jacko Page, as a matter of fact, who was the Regional Command South Commander. I was the Deputy Commander up in Regional Command East, to come down and spend New Year's Eve with him. And he had a bunch of people, that the Afghans that came in, and we had a New Year's party at down in Kandahar Airfield. It was quite good. There was not much alcohol being consumed by me, because that was against the rules. Uh, we had kind of near beer, which had been populated across a lot of our dining facilities and other things that were kind of non-alcoholic drinks. But it was fun. Yeah, it was at a time in Afghanistan when we really felt positive about what was happening. I certainly did, and I can be accused of wearing rose-colored glasses, but I actually thought we were making very good progress. And I remember we were sitting around the table there and drinking our non-alcoholic beers and celebrating the New Year, and with a variety of Afghan officers and others that came in. One of them was nominally the commander of the honorary commander of the Afghan Air Force, which largely at the time didn't exist,
Yeah.
but it didn't diminish his enthusiasm for the job, and his hopefulness for the Afghans to actually have something about. But it was it what I think about during that time was how hopeful people seemed about Afghanistan, and how hopeful we all seemed about it at that particular point. It was a really enjoyable evening, and something that kind of sticks in my mind here.
General, let's hope that hope returns again to the country. They really, really deserve
Yeah,
it. There are plenty of people in Afghanistan. They still hope. They
yeah.
experienced 20 years of progress. And as you said, I believe it wasn't for nothing. 20 years of experiencing that the country would be different, that will not be forgotten, no matter how dark a wall the Taliban erect around that people. I am so grateful for your time, General. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you, bro. Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.